continuing debate, the honourable member for Haldimand, Norfolk.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to rise to speak to the Fall Economic Statement Implementation Act 2022. There's an old adage that is found in the book of Proverbs, written by one of the wisest men that ever lived. King Solomon wrote, thousands of years ago, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. It is a statement that reminds us that the decisions we make today impact on the future. They can impact, and they do impact, on future generations to come. How much more is this true of leaders who are in charge of our nation's finances? This proverb teaches us that if we want to truly be good, if we want to be wise, and if we want to leave an inheritance for our children's children, we must conserve. We cannot just spend. We must save and invest in our future. Mr. Speaker, as an elected leaders, we have been entrusted with a profound responsibility to be stewards of our democracy and to preserve our Canadian way. I am very concerned about the direction of Canada and about the short-sightedness of this government. Canadians want clarity about the social contract that they have engaged in with this government. They know what they're giving, but they don't know what they're getting back. And often questions are dismissed and laughed at and mocked by this government. Canadians want answers to simple questions like, how can we buy an electric car to save the environment when we can barely afford food to eat? Or why does the government raise taxes on home heating, fuel, and groceries, only to refund us a pittance of what they've taken in the first place? Canadians just want to be able to fill up their gas tanks, to have a roof over their head, and to not skip meals, and to be able to take their children to school and to soccer practice. Canada is almost $1.3 trillion in debt, and the government has spent more than all other governments combined in the history of this nation. Right now, Canadians owe $56,000. That is their share of the national debt, and it's increasing by the day. Next year, interest payments alone will be nearly as much as the Canada Health transfer to all provinces combined. That is at a time when people are literally dying in emergency rooms because they cannot be seen in a reasonable amount of time by doctors. Just a few years ago, the Prime Minister promised to never go over the $10 billion in deficit. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, 40% of all new spending measures have had nothing to do with COVID. That's over $205 billion. The Liberal government used COVID as a cover for their non-essential, wasteful spending. The Prime Minister cannot be trusted with our finances. His government cannot be trusted. Things are falling apart. The government has spent $54 million on an unnecessary app, the ArriveCan app, that discriminated against seniors without smartphones and accidentally sent thousands of vaccinated Canadians into quarantine. One developer replicated this $54 million project in one weekend and said it shouldn't have cost more than $250,000. Several contractors said they never worked on the app and that they never received the millions of dollars that this government has said that they paid to them. Millions of dollars are missing, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberals just cannot account for. The Liberals' out-of-control spending has led to inflation, which has caused an increase in the cost of living. The price of food has seen double-digit price increases. 1.5 million Canadians visited the food bank last month, which is an increase of over 35% from last year. People are worried that they will have to choose between food and heating their homes this winter. The cost of housing is unaffordable. Even people who do not have mortgages on their property, it is difficult to pay their utility bills and cost of heating. Young people cannot afford to move out of their parents' home. Seniors do not have the ability, and those on disability do not have the ability to earn extra money to supplement their income. People on fixed income are living an unaffordable existence. I met a lady named Hillary this weekend in my riding, and she told me that to put a half a tank of oil in her tank, it cost $1,100, and $300 of that was on government taxes. And this will only heat her home for 1 month. I receive calls from farmers, manufacturers, small businesses who are desperate for workers. Yet we see massive backlogs at Immigration Canada. And despite this, our government still plans to triple the carbon tax on home heating, gas, and food. We're seeing billions of dollars of spending in this fall economic statement. And yet, the same problem of lack of transparency still exists. The Liberals have announced the Canada Growth Fund in the fall economic statement, and that's found on Part 4 of the Act. The fund will largely give corporations money to undertake projects in the area of climate change with investment towards net zero economy. While I and most Canadians support protecting the environment, it must be done in a transparent way that yields accountability and reduces emissions. Under the Growth Fund, we see a reference to ESG, Environmental Social Governance, and that is stated on page 31 of the fall economic statement. While the government has embraced this vague term, the average Canadian does not know what it means. But we have seen these types of pet projects before, Mr. Speaker, like the Growth Fund, that have resulted in outrageous waste. The $35 billion Canada Infrastructural Bank has not even finished one project, and the Liberals announced in 2016, 6 years ago, Mr. Speaker. The whole approach has been a failure. It was supposed to attract private sector investments, but has repeatedly failed to do so. Instead, the Liberals are spending millions on a bureaucracy, overhead, on operations, and on executive termination packages that yield no financial benefit to the taxpayer. Now we're expected to trust the government with billions of dollars in this Canada Growth Fund, a taxpayer-funded investment fund that, just like the Canada Infrastructure Bank, will subsidize experimental corporate-private business projects. Despite the failure of the Infrastructure Bank in not getting a single project completed, this Liberal government wants to invest $15 billion under this promise of a net zero economy in a similar scheme. But Canadians have questions about this Canada Growth Fund and about ESG. Here are some of the questions that came to my office. Since we know that businesses have to register the products and services of all transactions, and that all transactions will be digitally recorded and tracked under ESG, Environmental Social Governance, does that mean that the spending of Canadians will also be tracked? How will this accounting for the entire emissions life cycle of a project affect small and medium-sized business owners? Will small and medium-sized business owners endure more red tape, thereby having to spend thousands of dollars on lawyers, accountants, and environmental social governance consultants in order to comply with this ESG requirement? Since the goal is to reduce the carbon footprint and reach net zero, will there be limits on what Canadians can buy, where they can go, and how much fuel and products they can consume? These are natural questions that Canadians are asking. There is so much that is broken in our system, and we aren't going to fix it with more Liberal policies that continue to spend and lack transparency and accountability. Now, can we move forward? When questions that Canadians are asking about policies like environmental social governance and how this will affect their lives are left and unanswered and mocked by this Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, this is not about politics. This is about the future of Canada. This is about making sure that we leave a good inheritance for our children's children. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, for good conscience, I cannot vote in favor of this reckless, inflationary bill that lacks transparency. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Don Valley North.
Thank you very much, Speaker. For the past couple of days, during this debate of this bill, all I've been hearing from the Conservative side are highly partisan campaign-style slogans. The honourable member opened up her debate by talking about future. And today we know the world population has surpassed 8 billion. And there is no bigger issue for the world right now other than climate change. And that's why the government came up with the carbon pricing system, where the province can come up with their own system, or they can adopt the federal system. And with that, we offer rebates, grew from 300 plus now to 700 in the province of Ontario. And I think it's working to reduce emission and combating climate change. I want to ask the honourable member, does she have any substantial, real suggestions, and possibly amendments to this bill that helps us to fight climate change? Thank you.
Honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I remind the honourable member that I have a Master's of Environmental Studies, so I do not focus on slogans. And the environment is something that I do not believe is a partisan issue. It is a very important issue that we should not be using in to advance our political agenda. And what I have seen from the Liberals, Mr. Speaker, is that they are making life more unaffordable by tripling the taxes on home heating, gas, and fuel. The Liberals are not serious about protecting their environment. They have not even met their targets under the Paris Accord. They are not serious. It is a slogan for them, and they know the meaning of slogan, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you. I'm just waiting for the mic. Okay, it's back here. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her speech. And I have to say I don't necessarily agree with the environmental strategy that the Conservatives have, but it's very spectacular that this government is number 58 out of 64 and bragging about its environmental record. So I think we can agree on that. But coming back to this motion that we're talking about right now, in my riding, 3 hospitals have had their emergency rooms shut down repeatedly. In fact, in October in Port Hardy, 28 days of the whole month, there was no emergency services offered for the whole evening and night. And I'm just wondering if the member shares my concern about the reality that we're seeing no investment from the federal government to support provinces in being able to better deliver these services.
The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Thank the honourable member for a question. And indeed, Conservatives do share that concern about our failing healthcare system. And one of the reasons why the healthcare system is failing, Mr. Speaker, is because this government has spent more than all other previous governments in the history of this country combined. And right now, we are paying more on our interest. By next year, we will be paying more on our interest payments on our loans than we are paying in the healthcare transfer. And this is the reason why we have a failing healthcare system, and we need to get our finances in order and stop wasteful spending, Mr. Speaker.